Good morning. Continuing with our discussion of postmodernism and cinema. So last time where we stopped, we were talking about how postmodernist cinema happens to have certain features. We talked about Chinese box structure, we talked about pastiche, we talked about fragmented editing techniques. We were referring to theories of Linda Hutchin, especially with reference to her ideas on pastiche. And we also talked about something called self-referential cinema, where cinema makes commentary on itself. You remember? So we talked about 8½, Fellini's 8½, which is a commentary on the process of making a movie. How many of you have watched 8½? Are you familiar with that? Good. Wag the Dog, Barry Levinson's, where Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman play the lead roles, and Dustin Hoffman happens to be a producer who stages a war in order to divert the American public's attention from the fact that the president is having an affair and the elections are round the corner. So what do? So there are certain spin doctors in the president's office headed by Robert De Niro, and they approach a film producer played by Dustin Hoffman, and Dustin Hoffman is asked to give them a solution, and he says, if there is no war, let's invent a war, and that will distract the public, and it does. So it's a wonderful commentary on the role media plays in forging public opinion. Wag the Dog. I strongly recommend the movie. Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman. Stardust Memories, Purple Rose of Cairo, both by Woody Allen and also Zelig. And then you have Ed Wood and To Die For. We have already talked about these movies. To Die For is a movie starring Nicole Kidman, who literally we were talking about dies for her 15 minutes of fame. The movie was directed by Gus Van Sant. Another important feature of postmodern cinema is hyperlink cinema. The other way we were talking about hyperlink cinema, we talked about Babel, remember, and we also talked about Requiem for a Dream. So hyperlink cinema is a term coined by Elissa Quat for films which are multilinear in a metaphorical sense, and Pulp Fiction tops the list. While talking about genre bending, we were discussing the other day how Pulp Fiction is a landmark movie in the way the narrative is constructed. Other examples of hyperlink cinema could be Adaptation, Sliding Doors, Syriana. You were already mentioning Crash. I would also like to add 21 Grams and City of God. I am very sure most of these films are familiar to you. Of late, we have been having the phenomenon of anthology movies. Well, this is nothing new. It has always been in existence. A couple of directors coming together and making short films, but it has become more fashionable in recent times. So you have a number of big time filmmakers coming together and directing films. Coffee and Cigarettes is an excellent example of short movies, 10 minutes or so. Each movie the running length of each movie would be 10 minutes or so. But all movies are directed by Jim Jarmusch, who is an independent filmmaker, also known for Johnny Depp is starring Dead Man. You must watch Dead Man, especially for its music. There's excellent rock music. Paris Je t'aime, that is Paris I Love You, is an anthology of movies by several directors. Okay, and all movies are centered on the city of Paris. And here Paris is not just the glamorous city, okay, or the way we see Paris in Midnight in Paris, in Woody Allen's Paris. It's not that kind of Paris. In this city you have racial tensions. In this Paris you have poverty, you have alienation, you have loneliness. So it's that kind, but it's still Paris I Love You, and directed by different directors. okay, different from coffee and cigarettes, because in coffee and cigarettes, which is the space? A restaurant. All conversations are taking place in a restaurant over coffee and cigarettes, literally. So therefore the title. Paris, I love you Paris, in spite of all your weaknesses and faults. That's the idea. New York, I love you. Continuation, it's not as forceful as Paris, I love you, but it's still, it has a number of big time filmmakers directing films set in, short films set in New York. Shekhar Kapoor is one of the directors. Tokyo Stories and Toronto Stories. Toronto Stories is completely set, as the title suggests, in Toronto, and Tokyo Stories in Tokyo. So why we call these films, we have another title for these kinds of films. Do you know? Paris, New York, Toronto, Tokyo, City Symphony. Okay, so these movies are also giving you a glimpse of city in its various manifestations. So and very postmodern is because they give you fragmented glimpse, vignettes of something. Yeah, coffee and cigarettes. So a restaurant is not the focus, but the conversation, the kind of people you find. So this is, as F. Scott Fitzgerald rightly points out in The Great Gatsby, inexhaustible variety of human beings. This is what he is interested in, inexhaustible variety of human beings. So in Coffee and Cigarettes, the director is interested in the kind of people you find, all kinds of people around us. That's the idea. So very postmodernist, very fragmented, because it's not a linear, traditional kind of a story. And they are not linked at all. They know absolutely no link between people in all these films. Any comments, Rehan, about to say? The New York Stories that you remember? 3 movies, I keep on referring to the New York. Scorsese, Woody Allen, Coppola, all these children of New Hollywood's movement, and then they come together. All these movies are set in the city of New York. So wonderful movies, but not as short as you find in Paris, Jatim and Coffee and Cigarettes. Each movie runs into some 40 to 45 minutes. Now, I am going to discuss the key text for today's class is John Woo's Face Off. Anyone here who isn't familiar with this very popular movie? I can see lot of smiles. How kind of you, and how fortunate for me. Okay, so John Woo directed this movie, and let me point your attention towards the poster. Do you find anything unique about the poster of this movie? This was the way the movie was released. Is it one face or 2 different faces? 2 different faces, but how are they joined? How are they joined? Their eyes become one, right? There are 2, actually these are fragments of 2 faces, and they are joined together. Okay, and whose faces are these? Travolta and Cage. Yeah, and one eye belongs to Nicolas Cage and one eye to John Travolta. But the faces are so joined that it almost looks it's one face and having a common pair of eyes. Why do we need to have this kind of poster for a movie like Face Off? And Face Off, if you watch the movie, you know there is a literal meaning to it. Yeah, literally ripping somebody's face off. But then, Vedanta, have you seen the movie? Oh, you must watch it. Okay, it's very postmodernist, therefore we are going to discuss it. But face/off, there is another meaning to it. What is it? We often use the word Mexican face off. Yeah, confrontation between 2 people. Yeah. That's a typical signature style in most Tarantino movies and most John Woo movies. People just pointing guns towards each other's, headlong confrontation. So that's it, and that's the basic theme of the movie. Nicolas Cage and John Travolta having a headlong confrontation and swapping identities, not by choice, but forced by circumstances. Yeah. And then how swapping faces and swapping identities lead to the narrative. What kind of narrative emerges out of the swapping of it. So, it is a very good example of a postmodernist film, because we talk about fragmented identities, fractured narratives, and all these features are present in Face Off. So, Face Off, basically a very glossy, visually very compelling movie directed by the Hong Kong superstar director John Woo. Are you familiar with other movies by John Woo? The Killer, A Better Tomorrow, yeah, is one of his well-known Chinese films, Hong Kong martial art movie. He's not a typical wired kind, action director kind of a, it's more like a psychological conflict also. So, Face Off has lot of psychological conflict. So, the movie talks about blurred identities, and that's what you find in the poster also. And one key feature of the film is the way it represents masculinity as the self-conscious acting out of gender roles. John Woo happens to be a very hyper-masculine kind of a director. All his films have a strong code of masculine conduct. Yesterday we were talking about how Tarantino is influenced by the cinema of Sam Peckinpah and Brian De Palma, and those directors were known for their strong masculine codes, and so is John Woo. Okay, so if you watch the movie Face Off, you will understand both these men have a peculiar code of conduct. How to be a father, how to be a lover, how to be a husband, how to be a professional. Men on a mission, they have a personal code, they have a professional code, they have certain ethics of behaving with certain people. So, those codes are important in all John Woo movies and come across very strongly in Face Off. So, the credit sequence itself, how you have watched the movie recently, Siddharth, how does it begin?
I think the Nicolas Cage scene, right?
It begins with the Nicolas Cage scene. You also have John Travolta playing a detective, an FBI cop, an agent who is out to get Nicolas Cage, who is a dreaded criminal. Yes, and then there is a scene where it's a merry-go-round scene where, yes, where John Travolta's son is shot dead by Nicolas Cage. Of course, he meant to kill John Travolta, not the kid. And subsequently, John Travolta makes it a personal mission to catch Nicolas Cage. And the merry-go-round scene evokes nostalgic memories of Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train, because that's the way Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train, the climax of the movie is shot. And that too is a movie about a face-off between two men. That too hints at swapping identities. Not literally swapping faces, but identities. Okay, Strangers on a Train. If you watch these two movies back to back, you will understand that how important Hitchcock's influence is on this movie thematically. So, there's an intertextual reference. Now, I quote Frederick Jameson here, where he sees the reliance on the styles of the past as an indication of the particular kind of nostalgia that is one of the defining characteristics of postmodern art. So, nostalgia happens to be a very important part of all postmodern art. Okay, and this feature is seen very clearly in John Woo's Face Off. And Frederick Jameson also uses a term called random cannibalization of all the styles of the past, where the past is reduced to a series of spectacles. So Hitchcock's memorable scene is, if you quote or apply Frederick Jameson in John Woo's hands, it becomes like a random cannibalization. But now it's up to you to decide whether it is or whether it is an integral part. It's an integral intertextuality happening there. So this is what Frederick Jameson says in Postmodernism, or the cultural logic of the late capitalism. I think I have been referring to this work quite often. This could be your, one of your theoretical discussions. Jameson also says, and this is another work, Postmodernism and Consumer Society, where he talks about psychic fragmentation or schizophrenia of the postmodern life. Do take down these notes, where he says, as experience of the isolated, disconnected, discontinuous material signifiers into which fail to link into a coherent sequence. The schizophrenic does not know personal identity in our sense. A schizoid, a fragmented personality. Yeah. So the person is not aware that there are two sides, very opposing, very contradictory sides to his own personality. Do you know that Face Off was adapted, not exactly or not literally, but there was an adaptation in Hindi. Which movie was that? Are you aware of it? It was a very well-known movie, much hyped. Didn't do too well commercially, but for those times it was extremely well publicized, much hyped movie called Aks. It was the first movie directed by Rakesh Om Prakash Mehra, starring Amitabh Bachchan and Manoj Bajpayee, okay, where they had given a touch of Indian philosophy and spiritual element to the swapping, to the idea of swapping of identities. Now, see, example of pastiche in Face Off. So, music is seen as a pastiche. It is a combination of several kinds of movies. And now, remember, we were talking about highbrow culture, lowbrow culture. So, you have Handel's Hallelujah at one point. Nicolas Cage, of all the people, he personifies evil, and he is in a church, just almost making a spoof of a very holy song. At the same time, you have plenty of rock music throughout the movie, and then you have another very memorable scene, which is a shootout scene. People are shooting all over the place, and then Nicolas Cage, he doesn't want his son to get exposed to that kind of violence. So what does he do?
He carries him, like he keeps on pausing him.
No, he makes him wear a headphone, and the song which is playing is Somewhere Over the Rainbow. That is Judy Garland from Wizard of Oz. So it is totally contradictory to whatever is happening outside, around the child. Child watches the scene, bullets going all over the place and people running and chasing each other, hitting each other, but he doesn't hear those sounds because his father has put that melodious, beautiful music on him. Okay, so and this is nothing new. This is a very common device, having a background music which is completely opposite to whatever is happening on screen. How many of you are aware of Anurag Kashyap's Bijay Nambiar that directed the movie Shaitan? I watched the movie. There is a scene where these youngsters, they are running all over the chawls of Dharavi, and they are clad in burqa, which make them look very ridiculous. Yeah, and which is the song playing in the background? It's a shootout scene. Police is chasing them. Khoya Khoya Chand remixed. Khoya Khoya Chand, which is originally a song, a very beautiful, melodious, something like Somewhere Over the Rainbow kind of song, sung by Muhammad Rafi. Devanand performed to that song, maybe during the 50s or the early 60s. But now having a song like that for a shootout scene, what does it? It's a very postmodernist device. Many a time we don't pay attention to these things, but if you look at it deeply, yes, the filmmaker has done lot of thinking about giving the right kind, the very appropriate kind of background music to the situation. Otherwise, what kind of background music would you expect in a shootout scene? The bang bang music, or maybe very fast paced music, but imagine Somewhere Over the Rainbow or Khoya Khoya Chand, okay, for a scene which is extremely violent, hyperkinetic, but then you have a song like that as in the background. Okay, so a very strong, very forceful postmodernist device. Okay, the idea of having a doppelganger or your other, your double, is very intriguing, and this is another integral part of postmodern narratives, to have another identity and having a literal other. So, Sean Archer and Castor Pollux. Sean Archer is John Travolta, Castor Pollux is Nicolas Cage, and both these men have a son each. Okay, so they are quite alike in the way they behave, in the way they take their duties and their professions very seriously. Okay. It's almost like having your double out there. And there is a scene where Castor Pollux offers paternal advice to Sean Archer's daughter, how to save herself, gives her a knife from a potential molester. That's a very interesting scene. Now, nostalgia, we were talking the idea of nostalgia and how it informs postmodern narratives. So, Cage's transformation into Archer, so Nicolas Cage becomes Sean Archer. Who is Sean Archer? Basically, originally John Travolta. But now what is, if you have watched Nicolas Cage, he happens to be a very intense actor. Very intense, and there is hardly a funny bone in him. On the other hand, John Travolta is hardly the hyper-masculine guy he is forced to act out. So, he is not, he is the eternal cool. I mean, you watch him in Pulp Fiction, yeah, he is what we call a typical cool dude. That's the kind of actor John Travolta is, and there is always certain kind of an ambiguity about him. Yeah. He is not that in-your-face macho hyper-masculine actor at all, whereas Nicolas Cage is. And we have seen him performing very intense, very dramatic roles which John Travolta will never be known for, no intensity or no dramatic intensity for John Travolta. But then when John Travolta assumes the identity of Nicolas Cage, we are taken back to Con Air, yeah, the hero in distress, Moonstruck, a romantic hero, the intense hero, the suffering, the complex hero. Okay. All these attributes you can never associate with John Travolta. John Travolta, when he turns, Nicolas Cage, when he turns into John Travolta. Now, John Travolta is known for certain things, and one is his coolness, okay, and that comes through. And suddenly we find now Nicolas Cage acting the way, because at the back of your mind, you know this is Nicolas Cage. He is just wearing John Travolta's face, but then he assumes Travolta's identity, right? And then you see him doing the same walk, the same talk, okay, that Travolta is so loved for. And we know it evokes the memories of Pulp Fiction. We have just seen him in Pulp Fiction. We remember him for Grease and Saturday Night Fever. we know that John Travolta is the ultimate in Obercool, and that's the persona that comes across. So, trademark styles of performance. Having talked about this film, we will refer to another movie which came a little before Face Off, Natural Born Killers, Oliver Stone's, and then we will see how this movie satisfies many postmodernist conditions. So, what is it about? It is about again Bonnie and Clyde story redone, serial killers on the run, as played by Juliet Lewis and Woody Harrelson. The basic theme is how crimes and criminals are treated in a media saturated society. How many of you have watched the movie? Very nice. Do you remember the scene where Woody Harrelson first sets his sights upon Juliet Lewis? He brings, yeah, there's a very strange scene. He's literally carrying some dead meat with the blood is still pouring all over the place. Yeah, but how is the scene treated? We are told that this girl who is barely out of her teens, Juliet Lewis, she is sexually abused by her father frequently. Yeah, her mother is indifferent to it, and there is a brother, a very boorish younger brother, who is again who is totally into materialistic things of life. All he is interested in is how much pocket money he can get out of his parents. Father dominates the household, rules everyone with an iron hand, and it's a very dysfunctional, miserable household. And in walks Woody Harrelson, who is as far removed from a knight in shining armor as could be. He is nothing like that, but for Juliet Lewis' character, he is. Okay, because her family life is so disturbed that this deranged man could well be her savior. That's the idea. So, we live in a media saturated society where we are conditioned that love at first sight is possible, where women feel that a man just walks in and she can ride away into the moonlight with him, and then suddenly the scene turns into something else. Do you remember what happens? It turns into Oliver Stone gives it a touch of a television soap opera and a sitcom. Why does he do that? We live in a media saturated society. You fall in love and suddenly everything looks like as if you are part of television. And how much do they enjoy being on camera? Remember, later on there is even a character superbly played by Robert Downey Jr. Okay, the television anchor. So, a word about Oliver Stone. He comes on the heels of the new Hollywood cinema. He has learned his craft from all those people that we have been talking about so far. Martin Scorsese, he is a successor to them, a very natural successor to Martin Scorsese, to Brian De Palma, to Francis Coppola, Woody Allen. And if you watch him, you can see the influences. All the influences are all there. He also wrote the screenplay for Scarface, directed by Brian De Palma. He actually served as a soldier in the Vietnam War, and therefore his Vietnam trilogy, Platoon, Born on the 4th of July with Tom Cruise, and Heaven and Earth. He has a strong political ideologies. If you watch his list of movies, it's absolutely phenomenal, astounding the way he treats politics. We are talking about a man who has made JFK, who has made Nixon, and also George W. Bush. Okay, so a man who is strongly given to understanding the political happenings in the United States. Some of his more entertaining movies, Wall Street, which won Michael Douglas his Oscar. Any Given Sunday is a wonderful drama starring Al Pacino and Cameron Diaz. Even one of his earlier films, Salvador, starring James Woods as a reporter, a very young James Woods. So, it takes place in South America. Yeah. It's a brilliant movie if you watch it. One of his earlier attempts at direction, but so wonderfully done. Do you know the actor who played W? Josh Brolin. Okay. And how closely he resembles. Now, the two major differences between Pulp Fiction and Natural Born Killer. Natural Born Killers, although it is saturated with violence, it's anti-violence. Whereas Pulp Fiction tells us violence is cool. Pulp Fiction, of course, a typical Tarantino movie, so lot of hip music, rock and surf kind of music, whereas Natural Born Killers has a more, the music of that movie has a more dark tones to it. While Tarantino experiments with the narrative in Pulp Fiction, Oliver Stone is more interested in editing in Natural Born Killers. So, he does not experiment as much with the narrative, he does not disturb that, but editing wise suddenly you find a jump cut at some place, split screen some place else, the screen suddenly turning black and white from color and from color to black and white, the bat of an eyelid. Okay. So, a lot of experimentation with editing. Tarantino takes in the sense that if you watch, I was particularly interested in Reservoir Dogs. Now, if you look at the dogs, those guys sitting around the table, and the kind of conversation they indulge in, it's extremely hyper masculine, and the kind of violence, the ear splicing scene, yeah, it's a total lift from cinema of Sam Peckinpah, where violence is supposed to be extremely cool and very matter of fact. And do you know, there were women when the movie was first premiered, women in the audience fainted when they first watched the movie. But there was one woman who really enjoyed it, and that woman was Madonna. She said, I like this kind of cinema, okay, and I think violence is cool. Yeah. And Tarantino, I mean, no prizes for guessing. He was extremely flattered. I mean, Madonna complimenting you on your very first directorial effort. So, again, we were talking about Frederick Jameson and idea of schizophrenia in postmodernist society. So, this is something that you find in Natural Born Killers also. See, all the kind of expressionistic scenes that you find, the distorted images, and Natural Born Killers abounds in these images, distorted images, saturated colors. That's not the way it really is. I mean, I will ask you to go back to your Taxi Driver, where New York is noxious, poisonous green gases emanating from all over the place. It's almost like Travis Bickle is riding through Hades. The New York is hell. So, that is what we find in Natural Born Killers also, psychic fragmentation, distorted images. There is a scene where they are poisoned, where the girl is poisoned and the man is so drug induced, he is unable to look for the right medicine for her, and the entire screen goes green. You remember, for no reason at all, they kill off a very innocent Indian, a Native American, okay, and then the girl is bitten by a deadly cobra, and then they go out hunting for the medicine for her. So, this is what Natural Born Killers is all about. If you talk about how postmodernist it is, the movie is extremely rich in pastiche. There is a scene where they have kidnapped a girl from a small town, and she is tied up in the same room which this couple lives in, and while the girl is being tortured, meaningless torture, the couple is watching Scarface. It's very self-referential. Scarface, which was known for its hyper-violence on screen, and more importantly, it's written by Oliver Stone himself. Oliver Stone commenting on his own work that, look, we live in a society which is so full of violence. So, you have lots of experimentation with editing techniques. So, we get film footage, we get television style of editing. Sometimes the characters speak like cartoons. Mix of music is a mix of music too is a pastiche, a mix of contemporary rock as well as very traditional romantic kind of music. And why does he do that? Again, we go back to our new Hollywood filmmakers. After all, that has been his training ground. At no stage of the movie, Oliver Stone makes any attempt to get you involved, at least emotionally, with what's happening on screen. He wants you to keep your distance, and therefore all these fragmented editing techniques. Okay, again, you are watching a movie about violence. That message comes across. He is not inviting you to get emotionally involved with the audience, and therefore that that kind of editing technique. Okay, when you don't want to involve the audience, you don't call attention to the narrative and to the editing pattern. Okay, that means you almost feel like one, but suddenly when the screen goes black and white from color and the other way around, you know, oh, so you know your attention is broken off. When you are watching a movie where something very serious like a father abusing his daughter on screen, and suddenly the entire scene turns into a television sitcom, you know that you are watching something, and the director is asking you to think about it. Okay, don't just get involved in the narrative flow of the movie. That's what he's saying.
No-linear narrative device is first in the same purpose. Tarantino actually commented on Pulp Fiction in the same way as well.
Yeah.
Why he actually cut so that he can ensure that people are involved, they'll be thinking and
yeah, that's what involved in the sense you are intellectually involved. We don't want such films. Do not invite people to get emotionally involved. Emotional involvement was a feature of the classic Hollywood kind of cinema. Even for us, it's more like, you know, when we watch a movie which is very traditionally structured, okay, or a story which is very classically told, then the director is Jab Tak Hai Jaan. Okay, a movie like this invites you to be emotionally involved, because that's the kind of director Yash Chopra is. He wants us. Therefore, you know, there will always be a difference between this set of directors and the other set of directors. More successful directors would always want to capitalize on your emotional connect. Okay, whereas the other set of directors do not want you to get so emotionally connected with the product, because they want you to think about, yeah, what is happening on screen. A product of new Hollywood cinema, Oliver Stone's movies are basically extremely anti-authoritarian, and this is a trait you find in Natural Born Killers as well. So, all those people who are supposed to uphold our society, parents, sheriffs, cops, media reporters, they are generally portrayed as corrupt, violent, exploitative. Did you find that? Yes. So, there is a statement in the movie which fits the central idea of the film very well. In contemporary America, reality exists only in the context of media images. You remember simulacra and simulacrum, Baudrillard. the Gulf War did not take place. So whatever you watch on media, that's the only truth. Okay, so and that's the idea in Wag the Dog as well. There is no war, but a producer has shot a war. Okay, therefore there is a war, and you are supposed to accept it because I am showing it to you. Okay, and it's there. So postmodernist cinema, and there is an entire list of cinema which is focused on relationship between films and other media, films and television, films about films. So general characteristics of this kind of self-referential, self-conscious cinema is that basically these films tend to offer a critique of the commodification of American culture. They map the decline in the ability of Americans to distinguish between fiction and reality. It's very important. And if you look at our society, what's happening around us, I mean, look at all these reality shows. You know, this is a comparatively a new phenomenon for us. But don't you feel that increasingly we as a society, we are failing to distinguish between reality and fiction as seen through media images. The bottom line is that everything has been reduced to entertainment, and there is no fixed, ordered and central reality. That is the basic tenet of postmodernist literature. So watch these two movies again, Natural Born Killers, Pulp Fiction, and also Wag the Dog, and you will understand. Some other examples, Sidney Lumet's Network, classic movie, and there is a classic line in the movie, there is no America, there is no democracy. What do we have? IBM, Union Carbide, Dow and DuPont. It's a wonderful critique of American capitalism and media, from the director of 12 Angry Men and Dog Day Afternoon. More example where self-conscious cinema tells us that media is taking dangerous proportions. David Cronenberg, the Canadian filmmaker's Videodrome, and Elia Kazan's A Face in the Crowd. Media is addictive as well as corrupt. So Robert Redford's Quiz Show, Requiem for a Dream. All these movies I am very sure are familiar to you. You just have to refresh and apply the theory here. Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, directed by George Clooney. And then watch Scorsese's very honorable flop, King of Comedy, which almost wiped him off. After New York, he came up with King of Comedy, again with De Niro. In between there was another flop, but at least an Oscar-worthy flop, Raging Bull. Raging Bull, let me tell you, was a big flop, commercially flop, when it was first released. After these flops, what did he make? 3 flops in a row. King of Comedy, Raging Bull, New York. Out of which Raging Bull at least was a critical success. Exactly, Last Temptation of Christ, which was commercially successful. And Martin Scorsese, if you read his biographies and autobiography, there is a book called Scorsese on Scorsese. Wonderfully written book, where he tells you that people used to laugh in his face after these 3 movies. But then King of Comedy is a very good critique of media. Nicole Kidman's To Die For, we have already referred to. And before we wind up today's class, I want to talk to you about our own attempts at postmodernist cinema, which is Anurag Kashyap's Devdas. And if you look at the still here, do you find echoes of Face Off? Why? Tara, tell me why.
The eye is the same.
And whose faces are joined here and blurring of identities?
Abediyal and
Devdas and
Paro.
Paro.
Devdas and Paro. Okay, but very psychedelic now. Okay, very counter. So this is not your linear traditional devdas, but is very postmodernist and very countercultural devdas, because that's the kind of director Anurag Kashyap is. So when he was asked that why devdas, okay, I am quoting him from one of his interviews. He said that devdas is very applicable in India because ours is a country known for self pity. And that's the kind of hero Devdas is. Who is a hero? I mean, he is not your eternal loser. He is trying to find himself. So, it's coming of age movie. And what are you? So, it's a remake of old Devdas plus sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And all these are characteristics of the counterculture cinema. So, this is another theorist you should look at, Gerard Genette, who proposes the term metatextuality, or the critical relation between one text and another, whether the commented text is explicitly cited or only silently evoked, and you will have plenty of references of this in Devdi. The commented text is explicitly cited or only silently evoked. See, if you watch Devdi, it's not a homage to Bimal Roy's Devdas starring the great Dilip Kumar, or Sanjay Bhansali's Devdas starring the greater Shah Rukh Khan. Okay, I can see a lot of sniggers here, but okay, that's all right. But you see, so it's not a homage, it's actually a hostile reaction towards some of the earlier adaptations. Ranjit, any comments here? You have a hostile reaction towards what I just said?
No, the music also in this movie especially.
Yeah, completely subverts the kind of music you would expect in Devdas. I mean, after all, this is not Devdas Mukherjee, but he is Devendra Dhillon, and therefore he is Devdi. Okay, so there is the text is silently evoked. Now, Lenny, as played by Kalki, she is traveling in a coach and watches a video of Bhansali's Devdas. She watches a scene where Paro and Chandramukhi are dancing together from Sanjay Leela Bhansali's Devdas. So, the text is silently evoked. Okay, and in the original novel, the two women cross paths just once. They don't dance together, but they happen to cross paths. While this one is leaving the town, the other is entering the town, which is portrayed in Bimal Roy's version, starring Vijayantimala and Suchitra Sen. There is a scene where in Devdi, Anurag Kashyap's Devdi, the two women do come across face to face. They are in the Chandigarh bound train. They are sitting across each other and they acknowledge each other. Yeah, so it's a very metatextual kind of a scene. And very postmodernist in its narrative. There are three parts to it, and you get those cards reading, this is Dev, this is Paro, and this is Chanda. Remember the narrative. If you have missed on that, please do watch the movie again. Okay, and there is another very interesting example, and again the original or Bhansali's version is evoked when Dev is led by Chunilal to a bar. He passes a poster of Shah Rukh Khan in Devdas, the 2002 version. Did you notice that? Please do watch it. And while he is entering this underground bar, which is not just a bar, but it's also a center for many other addictions. And outside on the wall, you see a poster of Shah Rukh Khan in his Devdas avatar. Okay, so Devdi's journey from rustic Punjab to London and back, and also explores the dark, morbid underbelly of Delhi, something which is not usually shown in films. Delhi is usually the clean-cut, very sanitized cinema of Yash Chopra. Okay, beautiful girls in beautiful clothes, handsome heroes in their beautiful cars. Okay, so that's the kind of Punjab or Delhi or Punjabi culture that you are treated to in a more mainstream cinema, but not here. Okay, so the film is all about Devdi's journey, literal as well as metaphorical, and see how closely it also satisfies all the conditions given by Joseph Campbell's. Take away from today's class, read up on Frederick Jameson, Linda Hutchins' idea of pastiche, Frederick Jameson's essay on Dog Day Afternoon from Signatures of the Visible, and then Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. Do read it. It's a very interesting take, and it gives you an insight into into the journeys of many of our heroes, well-known, recognizable heroes. Okay, so Devdas, the romantic Devdas of Bhansali and Bimal Roy, and the postmodern Devdas of Anurag Kashyap. So while the earlier versions reflect idealism and but not really social reform, Devdi is more indicative of the globalized Indian youth. So you have Devdi for the postmodernist globalized times. So a reading of Devdi, which I highly recommend, is a pastiche, yes. I mean, even music is a pastiche. Emotional atyachar, contemporary rock, classical Indian ragas, everything is there. Is self-reflexive and highly self-referential in tones, and satisfies Bakhtin's idea of heteroglossic narrative, carnivalesque narrative, offering multiple perspectives on an event. There are certain events which are repeated if you watch it carefully. So you don't have that fixed order narrative, but it's a very disrupted kind of a narrative. Thank you very much.